I would first ask unanimous consent that Elisa Benison, a Government Accountability Office Detail Lead to the Armed Services Committee, have floor privileges during the consideration of the Fiscal Year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today to discuss the Fiscal Year 2018 National Defense Authorization Bill, which was passed unanimously out of the Armed Services Committee on July 10th. First, I would like to acknowledge Chairman McCain, whose leadership on this committee and in this body has been invaluable, indeed historic. His contribution, his indefatigable energy, his commitment to the men and women who serve us in uniform is something that has shaped this legislation and indeed shaped our country profoundly. Chairman McCain ensured the committee's thoughtful consideration of the President's request, which produced bipartisan legislation that I believe will improve the readiness, capabilities, and quality of life of our military personnel and their families. I would like to highlight some key aspects of the bill, beginning with the central national security issue, North Korea. Kim Jong-un is intent on developing a nuclear weapon that can be mounted on the head of a missile and shot at the United States homeland. Unfortunately, there is no set of military options that lead to a quick and certain strategy on North Korea. Diplomatic engagement that leads to a freeze of North Korea's missiles and nuclear programs is perhaps our best path forward. But in order to bring North Korea to the table, we must reinforce our ballistic missile defense systems and demonstrate that all options, including military options, remain on the table. To that end, this bill authorizes additional funding above the budget request to make upgrades to our ground-based mid-course defense system, to protect the homeland, and to buy 24 additional THAAD interceptors, a regional defensive system that we have deployed to the Republic of Korea. This bill also enhances our security cooperation in the Pacific by authorizing the Asia-Pacific Stability Initiative, which will help strengthen our posture in the region and provide additional support and security assistance to our partners and allies. Another significant national security issue is the escalating threat from Russia's malign influence activities. The nature and extent of this threat was brought home with Russia's interference in our 2016 election, but our allies and partners in Europe have been dealing with this threat for many years now. This bill contains significant resources through the European Deterrence Initiative and the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative to reinforce our military presence in Europe and build the capacity of the NATO alliance to counter Russia's efforts to intimidate and coerce its neighbors. The bill takes critical steps to prepare for any attempt by Russia to attack our democracy in next year's midterm elections. One provision states that it is the policy of the United States to respond using all instruments of national power to any and all cyber attacks that intend to cause significant harm to the nation, including undermining U.S. democratic society. This is a clear message to Vladimir Putin that Kremlin influence is unacceptable and will be strongly answered. A second provision, which is in an amendment I offered that was accepted in committee, would require the Secretary of Defense to create a task force to integrate all department organizations responsible for what is called information warfare, in order to achieve a unified and coherent capability to counter, deter, and conduct strategic information operations. The Department of Defense must play a vital role in developing strategies and executing operations to counter and respond to Russia's aggression against America and our close allies in Europe. But efforts by the Department of Defense are not enough. It is essential to have a whole-of-government approach if we are to deal effectively with the multifaceted threat posed by China, by Russia, by North Korea, by Iran, and by others against the West. We need to develop comprehensive and specific strategies, taking advantage of all instruments of national power and the contribution of friends and allies to deter and respond to aggression in all its forms. We need to bring together the authorities and capabilities of law enforcement, homeland defense, the military, and the intelligence community to confront cyber threats that recognize no organizational or functional boundaries. At the same time, we must improve how we work with the private sector, which owns and operates the critical infrastructure on which our democracy, our society, and our prosperity depend. This bill advances our goal of ensuring we have the strategy, organization, and resources necessary to counter the complex challenge posed by Russia's malign activities and the malign activities of other states and non-state actors. This legislation also provides needed authorities and funding for our military personnel who are engaged in operations abroad. Through the support of our partners on the ground, we continue to make significant gains against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. However, our partners require sustained support to clear the remaining ISIS strongholds and ensure a sustainable security environment going forward. Therefore, this bill authorized $1.8 billion to support the Iraq and Syria train and equip programs. The bill also includes $4.9 billion for the Afghanistan Security Forces Fund to assist our Afghan partners as they continue to take the fight to the enemy, while also working diligently to build and professionalize their security forces. This is a critical investment for the stability of the region and the security of the international community. With respect to our services, we have taken steps to improve their capabilities, their readiness, and their ability to fight and win. With respect to our Navy and Marine Corps, this bill represents a continuation of the efforts that are so important for improving their ability to address the challenges of this new century. The proposals would begin significant efforts to improve the readiness of Navy and Marine Corps aircraft, ships, and weapon systems. It is clear that high operational tempo, coupled with limited resources for training and maintenance, have contributed to the recent tragedies with the USS John S. McCain, the USS Fitzgerald, and the V-22 crash off the coast of Australia. At first, we must recognize the sacrifice of sailors and Marines and pay our respects to their families for the sacrifice that they have given to this nation in these accidents. That sacrifice continues to impress all of us with the contribution of everyone wearing the uniform of the United States and their dedication to their country, and it calls forth renewed commitment by ourselves to work together to achieve the ends of this great nation. We must prioritize resources for our military leaders so that we can ensure our service members have access to the best equipment and best training possible so that they conduct these missions safely in spite of very difficult challenges that they face. This bill also provides significant investments in our next generation Virginia-class submarines to ensure our Navy remains dominant under the sea. It authorizes a multi-year procurement contract authority and advanced procurement for up to 13 Virginia-class submarines. In addition, the bill adds $750 million for economic order quantity material for the Virginia-class Block 5 multi-year procurement program. Meeting today with the Secretary of the Navy, he once again reiterated that the Virginia-class submarine program, together with the Ohio replacement program, the ballistic submarine program, are the highest priorities of the United States Navy. This bill supports those high priorities. The Navy will be able to use this funding to expand the industrial base across the second and third contractors, anticipating an increase in production needed to increase submarine force levels. An additional $450 million is authorized to increase support for expanding the industrial base or for advanced procurement to buy an additional Virginia-class submarine in fiscal year 2020. The bill provides authority for another multi-year contract for the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer program and provides the Navy the authority to buy as many as 15 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. It also adds $1.8 billion to buy a third destroyer in fiscal year 2018. The bill also authorizes $1 billion for incremental funding for construction of an amphibious ship and more than $1.2 billion for several auxiliary ship programs, including 5 surface connectors and 1 expeditionary sea base. With respect to naval aviation, this bill also recommends significant increases for multiple programs. Notably, it authorizes 10 additional FA-18 fighters and 10 F-35 fighter variants, 4 additional KC-130J tankers, and 6 additional P-8A submarine hunters. With respect to the Air Force, the bill makes significant increases in authorization by adding an additional $10.4 billion for Air Force programs to purchase 14 additional F-35A fighters, 12 MC-130J aircraft, 3 additional KC-46A tankers, and authorizing funding for the replacement of the A-10. With respect to the Army, I'm pleased that this bill also makes a number of important investments in Army modernization. It authorizes full funding for the Department's request for AH-64 Apache attack helicopters and UH-60 Black Hawk utility helicopters. In addition, the bill supports the Army's unfunded requirement for additional Apaches by including $312.7 million to procure additional helicopters. Likewise, the bill fully supports the Army's request for modernizing Army ground combat vehicles, including M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, and the Stryker combat vehicle. The bill also includes funding to support Army unfunded requirements, including recapitalization of Abrams tanks and procuring a fourth upgrade set of double V-hull Strykers. Finally, this bill makes targeted reductions in Army network modernization programs, since Army Chief of Staff General Milley plans to make a decision soon on the way forward with regards to these programs. Once a decision has been made, it is my hope that the Army will provide the committee with a detailed plan for network modernization to include details on the funding necessary for this approach. Our Special Operations Forces remain at the tip of the spear of our effort to counter violent extremist groups. The bill fully funds U.S. Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, and includes an increase of approximately $85 million to help address unfunded requirements for additional intelligence collection, precision strike, undersea mobility, and communications capabilities. Additionally, the bill includes a new authority designed to support the ability of our special operators to work with partners to counter irregular warfare, or so-called gray zone challenges posed by our adversaries. The bill authorizes funding to modernize our triad of nuclear-capable air, sea, and ground delivery platforms, the bedrock of our defense posture against an existential threat. The B-21 heavy bomber is authorized at the requested level to continue engineering, manufacturing, and development to be fielded in the mid to late 2020s. This heavy bomber will replace the dependable but aging B-52s that were built in the 1960s. The committee is working with the team at the Government Accountability Office for rigorous oversight on the new bomber program. When the B-52 requires in the 2040 timeframe, its airframe will be approaching 100 years old, and the grandchild and children, rather, of the original pilots will be flying the plane. Turning to the area of undersea deterrence, in order to maintain a sea-based deterrent, the current fleet of 14 Ohio-class submarines must be replaced starting in 2027 due to the potential for hull fatigue. These submarines are literally wearing out. By then, the first Ohio submarine will be 46 years old, the oldest submarine to have sailed in our Navy in its history. The third leg of our triad, our land-based ICBMs, will not need to be replaced until the 2030s. We have authorized continued development of a replacement for this responsive leg of the triad, which acts as a counterbalance to hostile ICBMs. I know there is concern about Russia's violation of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty, which is a foundational arms control treaty from the late 1980s. The committee has received classified briefings on the actions taken by Russia, and they are indeed serious. And I urge all my colleagues to request these classified briefings if they have not done so. While some have called for the U.S. to perform developmental testing of systems that are non-compliant with the treaty, this committee has pursued a cautious and measured approach of looking at what kinds of research within the confines of the treaty we can perform if called upon to counter this threat. Again, let me stress that I do not support withdrawing from the treaty, and our best approach is to bring the Russians back into compliance. With respect to energy use, which is an important aspect to the bottom line and to the operational capabilities of our military, the bill contains several provisions that enhance how the department pursues energy resilience, which directly supports readiness and mission assurance of our warfighters. Additionally, this bill contains a requirement for a defense threat assessment and master plan on climate-related events, and a comprehensive strategy and technology roadmap and how the department can more effectively use water. In the area of science, technology, innovation, I am pleased that this bill authorizes increases in funding for science and technology research efforts by over $375 million above the President's request, including a total of $2.3 billion for university research programs. These programs are critical to ensuring that our military retains its technological battlefield superiority in areas like cybersecurity, unmanned and robotic systems, high-energy lasers, space, and hypersonics. The bill streamlines the ability to access expertise and technologies at our nation's universities and small businesses, whose expertise and innovation is the cornerstone of the technologies on which our military depends. Additionally, it continues efforts to strengthen the capabilities of our defense labs and test ranges, including removing red tape that inhibits their effectiveness and supporting their efforts to build world-class technical workforces. The bill also authorizes 2 new innovation offices, the Strategic Capabilities Office and the DIUX Silicon Valley Office, with special authorities to hire the unique program management talent they need to execute their innovative activities. In the area of acquisition reform, I am pleased that the bill continues efforts to streamline procurement practices to support the department's efforts to obtain the best goods, technologies, and services on a timely basis and at a fair and competitive price. The bill includes provisions from Senator Warren and Senator Blumenthal to ensure the Pentagon works with contractors who safeguard worker conditions. The bill also makes significant and needed changes to the way the department buys, evolving toward more agile and effective commercial acquisition practices. These new practices should enable the department to build and buy the most modern software and IT for our weapon systems, platforms, and business systems. The bill also includes a provision from Senator McCaskill that will provide more transparency and require more deliberate planning in the use of service contracts in order to control this rapidly growing part of the Pentagon budget. In the area of Pentagon management, I am pleased that the bill includes provisions to improve financial stewardship and help the Pentagon finally get a clean audit opinion on its financial books. The Pentagon has been trying to obtain a clean audit opinion for 27 years, and the continual failure to do so calls into question its ability to steward the large funding increases proposed in this bill transparently and efficiently. This bill accomplishes much also on behalf of our service members and the Department of Defense. It authorizes a 2.1% pay raise for all service members and reauthorizes a number of expiring bonus and special pay authorities to encourage enlistment, re-enlistment, and continued service by active duty and reserve component military personnel. The bill permanently extends the Special Survivor Indemnity Allowance, scheduled to expire next year, provides $25 million in supplemental impact aid and $10 million in impact aid for severe disabilities, including $5 million available to the Secretary to direct the schools to areas with higher concentration of disabled military children. This legislation also enhances military family readiness by addressing the shortage of qualified child care workers and by increasing flexibility for military families undergoing permanent changes of station. A provision in the bill also addresses the Marine United situation by making the non-consensual sharing of photos and videos of an individual's private anatomy or of sexually explicit contact involving the individual a criminal offense under the UCMJ, even when the initial taking the photo or video was consensual. Once again, this bill includes authorization for a needed package of health care reforms, including modest increases to working-age retiree health care cost shares, while ensuring that the cost shares remain far below those required by civilian plans. It also requires the department to establish a Medicare Advantage demonstration program for TRICARE for Life beneficiaries that will achieve better health care outcomes for beneficiaries with chronic health conditions, as well as cost savings for the beneficiaries and for the Medicare and TRICARE programs. During floor consideration of this bill, Chairman McCain and I would like to offer an amendment that will authorize a new BRAC round. I know this topic concerns many of my colleagues, but I believe it is necessary to allow the department to gain efficiencies and savings by shedding excess infrastructure. In drafting this amendment, Chairman McCain and I have worked to include the lessons learned and address the common critiques from the previous BRAC rounds. The amendment would use the most recent national military strategy and an elevated force structure to determine if there's any excess capacity. Any recommendations submitted by the Secretary would have to be certified by CAPE, which is an agency, an independent agency within the department. Require third-party validation by the GAO. Provide a greater transparency to communities by publishing in the Federal Register all the pertinent data. And any list of closures would have to be affirmatively approved by the President and Congress. Again, I know this is a difficult issue, but I believe we must make difficult decisions as stewards of our Department of Defense and taxpayers' dollars, and I look forward to a debate. To my disappointment, the bill also includes a series of provisions that add unnecessary complications to successful medical research efforts funded by the Pentagon. The program has funded research over the years. These programs have led to new treatments for burn victims, new transplant procedures, and rehabilitation techniques for TBI and PTSD patients, and a score of other medical innovations. These congressionally directed medical research programs have been independently reviewed by experts at the National Academies of Science and found to be world-class, significantly and scientifically rigorous and innovative and effective. At a time when the President is proposing drastic and harmful cuts to NIH medical research budget, I do not think we should intentionally throw bureaucratic hurdles in the way of researchers trying to cure debilitating and life-threatening diseases. I hope we can remove these provisions before we pass the bill. I'm also concerned about several provisions in this bill that would weaken important protections for American defense manufacturers, including small businesses in my state that supply advanced technology and systems to the military. I note that existing domestic sourcing laws include provisions that protect the Pentagon and taxpayers from paying unreasonable and unfair prices, and these laws serve to help protect American jobs. We need to ensure that we have an innovative, reliable, trusted, and secure domestic industrial base as we grow the military and respond to contingency operations and surge production requirements. Finally, I would like to say a few words about the funding levels for defense. The bill reported out of the committee includes $610.87 billion in discretionary spending for defense-based budget requirements and $60.2 billion for overseas contingency operations. It also includes $21 billion for the Department of Energy-related activities, resulting in a top-line funding level of $692 billion for discretionary national defense spending. While many of us agree that the department requires additional resources, these funding levels do not adhere to the spending limits mandated by the Budget Control Act of 2011. If enacted and funded at these levels, sequestration would be triggered, thereby wiping out about $88 billion for across-the-board cuts. This would be a very complicated situation. We would be giving money on one hand and taking it back with the other, literally. We must come together to address the insufficient funding caps in the BCA, and we must do so for both defense and non-defense accounts. Since the Budget Control Act was enacted in 2011, we have made repeated incremental changes to the discretionary budget caps for both defense and non-defense accounts. We have done so in order to provide some budgetary certainty to the Department of Defense and also to other agencies. I believe that if defense funds are increased, funding for domestic agencies also must be increased, because they too are suffering from the same severe budgets that the Defense Department has suffered over the last several years. In addition, at this point, I think all of us acknowledge our national security is broader than simply the accounts in the Department of Defense. It's the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and many other agencies that contribute to our national security. In fact, in the wake, literally, of Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, we have seen the Center for Disease Control dispatched, EPA individuals dispatched to evaluate, in the Harvey situation, threats to the environment, and in the case of Irma, to try to prevent those threats by being deployed before the storm actually struck. So our national security, our public safety, all these issues involve not just the Department of Defense, but the whole array of government enterprises. We understand that the well-being of our nation and what our men and women are fighting for depends on funded and functioning agencies, not just the Department of Defense. For example, as I've said before, with these two hurricanes, tens of thousands of Americans have needed help. The federal agencies have come forward, and I've mentioned them: Center for Disease Control, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, the Small Business Administration, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Social Security Administration. Those are just a handful. Providing for the security of Americans requires the whole of government, and it should all be funded fairly. We should remain responsible stewards of taxpayers' money while also ensuring we provide sufficient funds to meet the needs of our nation. Let me conclude by once again thanking Chairman McCain and my colleagues in the committee for working thoughtfully and on a bipartisan basis to develop this important piece of legislation. I would also like to thank the staff who has worked tirelessly on the bill throughout the year. I look forward to a thoughtful debate on the issues that face our Department of Defense and our national security. And with that, I will yield the floor.